Hi, I'm Chris Dowsett, business analyst with Merit Associates, and we're here today to talk about animation tax relief, which is one of the creative tax relief incentives offered by the UK government. So, what is animation tax relief? Animation tax relief is an incentive given by the UK government for qualifying animation programs, where you can receive up to a 25% tax rebate. That's based on either 80% of the core expenditure or just the UK expenditure on its own. The animation itself, to apply for the relief, can't be for training purposes, it can't be for promotional purposes. There is a list of exclusions. If you're not sure what those are, it's best to speak to an expert to establish what those are. Who can claim animation tax relief? The animation company that's responsible for the animation. It must be a UK company that's subject to UK corporation tax law and jurisdiction. There can only be one company that claims UK animation tax relief, and that company will be known as the production company. To qualify as a production company, you have to be responsible for the planning, production and the decision making relating to the animation program. And as I've already said, there can be only one animation company that claims animation tax relief. So what counts as an animation? Well, for a start, it has to be intended for broadcast. Whether that's on satellite, terrestrial or streaming services, it doesn't matter, but it has to have the intention to be broadcast to the general public at some point. The important thing to note is that you don't have to wait till the end of the process to claim animation tax relief, because it's likely your program may take several years to actually produce. You can apply for an interim certificate, which will be valid for up to 3 years, or when the program's completed, you can apply for a final certificate. If you apply for an interim certificate, you will need to eventually apply for a final certificate as well once the animation is complete. That will include providing a copy of the final program to BFI for their review. So, how do you claim animation tax relief? Well, step one to the claim process for animation tax relief is to acquire that BFI certificate. If the animation is still in production but you want to take advantage of the scheme, you'll need to apply for an interim certificate. Now, regardless of whether it's an interim or a final certificate, you will need to acquire 16 out of 31 points available through the certification process. There are 4 sections to this process. There's section A, which talks about the characters, the locations, the story and the language the script is written in. There's then section B, which talks about diversity, culture and heritage. So long as those relate to the UK or show the diversity of the UK population, you can get some extra points in there. And that doesn't have to be on-screen content, and that can be the team behind the production as well. We've then got section C, which is referred to as hubs, which is effectively where the costs take place. So where was the recording taking place? Where did filming take place? Where was the music score composed? All of that can add to the points. And finally, we have section D, which is referred to as cultural practitioners, but is essentially key personnel. Who are the people actually working on the production? And if they're UK residents, or if they're UK nationals, or EEA residents or EEA nationals, they will qualify as a cultural practitioner, and you can get 8 points alone in that section. So it's a very straightforward process in some respects, but it is a 18-page application form that you will need to fill out online, and it will include a detailed breakdown of your costings or your production schedule or budget if you're looking for an interim certificate at this stage. It then takes BFI around 4 to 12 weeks to process your application once that's forward as well, and they may come back with questions. Once again, it is a complicated process. I would recommend use of a specialist to help you with this to make sure you're getting it correct. The second part we need to talk about this is how do you attribute those costs. So we use a very detailed costing schedule. The costing schedule will literally break it down per item, per section, because you have to split out between UK costs, European costs and costs elsewhere in the world. Now, for your UK animation, you can only claim on activity that was consumed within the UK, and that's an important word, consumed, because it's not necessarily that the activity took place within the UK, but it was consumed. So for an example, in your animation program, you have a 2D background. That's produced by artists over in, let's say, Japan. So you've got Japanese artists, they produce a 2D background for you. However, that's then put into principal photography within the UK studio to form part of the animation. So it enters into production at that point. So suddenly you can include that cost. However, if you have voice work taking place in Japan, unfortunately that won't qualify because that is consumed within Japan and the recording is taking place in Japan. So hopefully that clarifies that a bit more. But if you're unsure, by all means reach out, we'll have a chat about it, that's not a problem. Now the other thing that we have to look at is once you've got that interim certificate or you've got that final certificate, and by the way the interim certificate is valid for 3 years from the date you receive it. Once you've got that certificate, you're now ready to actually submit a claim. You should have broken down your costs per item, per location, and ideally per phase, because remember, you can only claim pre-production, production, and post-production costs. You can't claim for your conceptual development, you can't claim for all the work you put together, for pitching the idea, or even the script, if the script is used just to make a decision on whether it goes into production. However, scripts are slightly different because if the script does change through the process of pre-production, production, and post-production, then you could include elements of that script cost but not the whole amount. Now once you've got that all in place and you've broken it down, the way that you actually claim your animation tax relief is by updating your company's annual tax return. There are some boxes on the tax return that you fill in once you've got the answers to that, and you do have to take into account that you need to produce a separate profit and loss specifically for this, and it should be reporting on the differences in that. That can be quite complicated. Not all accountancy software can deal with that, so do check with your accountants whether they can deal with separate trades or not. If they can't, speak to a specialist like ourselves, because we do have the software that allows us to do that. Once you've broken that trade down separately, you can enter those figures specifically into your company's annual tax return, known as a CT600, and then submit that with your certificate to HMRC's creative unit. They will then typically take around about 28 days to review your application and your submission, and then if they've not received anything from you, it can take up to another 2 weeks to actually provide you with the funds. So you're looking at about a 6-week turnaround from when you submit that VGT application, but also bear in mind that it can take up to 12 weeks to get your certificate at the moment from BFI, although they target 4 weeks. So you're looking at potentially 3 months from the start of the process until you get your cash, which is why a lot of companies are now really considering interim certificates more regularly than just a final certificate. Okay, so now I've got a few tips for you to hopefully make the process of applying for animation tax relief that little bit more simple. The first tip I've got for you, which is a common mistake for people that have never applied for animation tax relief before, is to remember you only need to apply for the 16 points you need. You don't need to try and get every point when applying for your certificate. So look at the animation, look at the form, and make sure you're only applying for those that you need. I would advise avoid, if you can, applying for points in section C, which we've spoken about earlier, the cultural hubs, where the cost took place, and D, the practitioners, because to get those ratified, you will need that to be certified with an accountant's report, and that can cost you some extra money. Typically, an auditing and accountant will be looking anywhere between £1,000 to £3,000 to produce that for you. And it is possible to pass the application process with just the points in A and B. So only go for the points you need. If you do need to go for additional points, I recommend section D, because that's more straightforward. It's just talking about the people in the team and just confirming their residency or their nationality using your verified independent accountants. That could reduce the cost somewhat. My second tip for you is about costs. The important thing to remember about the costs is track them. Now, quite often here we'll refer to something called a special purpose vehicle. Now, a special purpose vehicle is a separate entity for your company which allows you to create its own profit and loss account and report on that completely separately. So it ring fences those costs and the income specifically for that. It'll also help you, if you go for a special purpose vehicle, to maximise the amount of relief you've got, because now you're not having to apportion over multiple projects, so you can be confident that the costs you're putting forward are all relevant to this particular production. Well, thank you for listening, and I hope you found that informative. If you do have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. My contact details are on the screen here. By all means, ring, email me, don't mind. Once again, thanks for listening. I hope you found it informative, and maybe I'll catch you in another video.